So after my 30K Q&A video, it came out that a bunch of you really want me to do character build videos. This is something I've never done in the past, though I'm no stranger to doing. So I guess what I'll give you up front as a first sort of trial era episode here is my Cleric Fighter Lightning Thunder Supreme Melee Damage build. I don't have a clever name for it. I just have a character that I built. So if you want to see what that is and how this may work in the future, stay tuned. I didn't even think of a bit because I just started rolling into this video. Crap. I guess, what's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and just so you know, in the past I had done build videos, but they were pop culture characters. There's a series and a playlist here. There's about 44 episodes on it of a stream I used to do called It Builds Character. I basically started taking my love of character building in all RPGs and Dungeons & Dragons specifically, and trying to emulate pop culture characters in doing so. I started this back maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right after the Castlevania Netflix series launched. I wanted to take my love of Castlevania and D&D and build Trevor Belmont, so I did. And that stream was pretty consistent for a while, and then due to a bunch of different things, it would fall off, then it would come back, then it would fall off, and it's on hiatus for the moment, but I may attempt to bring it back. But what you all requested from me is character builds, and I guess that was more like build concepts. And there's a lot of new content that a lot of people want from me, but that's tricky because new content on YouTube, if it's not something that people come to know you for, it's hit or miss. So we're gonna give this a shot. So I'm gonna jump over here to D&D Beyond. Now I replicated the character that I had back in 2015, I think it was, 2016. So when I had built this character, this was for the first time I'd gotten a chance to really play Dungeons & Dragons in about, I don't know, 7 or more years at that point. I played like one short 5th edition campaign, and then that ended, and that was like a once a month, every so often game. And then this was a weekly campaign that was streamed on a friend's YouTube channel. And I made this character, and I was really excited about this character and built a whole long backstory. And then it actually came out as I started to play the character. I found a really interesting build concept. And it's probably not new or original at this point because the game's been out for forever and people have theory crafted. But at that point, I think it might have been. At this point, too, to give you a frame of reference, all we had was the player's handbook and the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. None of the new books were out, so I built the character only using those options. So my character, Axton here, he is a human fighter cleric. A little backstory on that, when I was building the character to look at the party, we didn't really have anybody who could do healing. So I was going to start off as, I was going to be a life cleric. That was my plan, and I was going to be just a healer. But I said I wanted to start as a fighter because I really wanted to use a maul as my weapon of choice because I built a whole backstory around it, and at that point I had never played a character with a maul or even played in a game with anybody who had one, and it just seemed really cool to me. So I wanted to do that. And life clerics don't get martial weapon proficiencies, so I said I'll start off as a fighter and then I'll multi-class into cleric. After the first 2 sessions, we leveled up and I put a second level in fighter just to get the action surge. And nobody took any damage because everybody was really good at maneuvering and avoiding damage. So I said, I don't need to be a healing cleric. We also don't have any AoE or serious damage output. I think we had a warlock, a paladin, and a rogue. And the paladin never used smites, and the warlock just used, a druid rather. And the druid just did wild shapes. So we didn't really have like good AoE. So I said, I'll be a Tempest Cleric instead. And I was like, oh, crap, I could have just been a Tempest Cleric the whole time and I would have gotten the martial weapon proficiency. So, long story short, I started off as a fighter, and then after 2 levels, I multi-classed into Cleric, and I just continued going with Cleric for a while. And the reason I chose Tempest Cleric is because if you know anything about the Tempest Cleric, it's a really solid option because you're going to get things like Wrath of the Storm right out the gate. When people hit you, you can do retributive damage to them as thunder or lightning. You can then, the big one here, then the kind of the crux of this whole build is the Channel Divinity. You can use your Channel Divinity instead of rolling when you deal lightning or thunder damage and just deal the maximum instead. So if you're going to use Thunder Wave and it does 2d8, you could use your Channel Divinity to not roll 2d8, but just do 16 points of damage. You have Turn Undead, Thunderbolt Strike. If you deal thunder or lightning damage to a larger or smaller creature, you can push them away. And then also part of this build is Divine Strike, where when you hit someone with a weapon attack, you can deal an extra d8 thunder damage. So more stuff about this. At the time, I had chose Defense as my fighting style to boost my AC a little bit, losing out on that shield. We have Action Surge, and then eventually we took a 3rd level in Fighter and then a 4th level for the ability score improvement, and we went with Eldritch Knight. Now, I was unsure at this point because I hadn't really thought this through, and I was like, man, my intelligence isn't great, but it's not bad. It's a 14. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. I can just choose spells that don't require my intelligence at all as far as saving throws or attack rolls, and that'll really balance out. And hey, the Sword Coast Adventures Guide had just come out, and they introduced a new cantrip for wizards, warlocks, and sorcerers, which was Booming Blade, Green Blade, and things like that. So I said, well, I technically have access to that cantrip list, so I'm going to take Booming Blade as my cantrip, because if you're unfamiliar with Booming Blade, if we jump over here, Booming Blade does thunder damage. So it's as an attack as part of this spell that you cast. So you still make the attack with your weapon, and you do Booming Blade on top of that. And if you hit, the target becomes sheathed in booming energy. And if they willingly move before the spell ends 1 round later, they take thunder damage. And then here, my character now, as you see here, is at level 11. So that if that person moves, they're going to take 3d8 thunder damage. But my initial hit is going to deal 2d8 thunder damage. So right now, if I were to swing casting Booming Blade with my Maul, I will deal the 2d6 plus my strength modifier and damage with the Maul. And if I choose to do Booming Blade on top of that, it will deal the 2d6 for the Maul plus 2d8 damage for the Booming Blade. But if you also recall, over here, with Divine Strike, we add an extra d8 thunder damage on 1 attack. Now, right now, we are only 4 levels in Fighter, so we can't do a second attack. So if we were to do 1 strike with our attack action, we could deal 2d6 for our Maul, 2d8 for our Booming Blade, plus an additional d8 for our Divine Strike. So 3d8 thunder damage plus 2d6 plus strength modifier in Maul damage. And that's when I had the realization, well, wait a minute. If I choose my Divine Strike's thunder damage, Booming Blade is thunder damage, and I have this Channel Divinity that if I deal lightning or thunder damage, I can maximize that damage. So right out the gate, if I were to do, I guess I should say, there's magic items on this character too. I can go through them at the end. But this character had a +1 Maul, right? So magic can overcome damage resistance and things like that. He's a Cleric of Tymora. That's why there's a lot of fate themes here. If I were to roll an attack, just like I had said, and use my Channel Divinity, I would do 2d6 plus 6 damage for the Maul, plus that 3d8 thunder damage. But if I choose to use my Channel Divinity, that just becomes 24 thunder damage. But I could, if I say crit on this, which you can choose to use your Channel Divinity whenever you deal that damage. So if I were to say crit with my Maul, I would deal 4d6 for the Maul plus 6 damage, and that 3d8 becomes 6d8, and now I would add a static number with the Channel Divinity of 48 thunder damage on top of that. Now that will go up again once I eventually hit level 17 and the Booming Blade damage goes up to 3d8. And once I've hit 14 in Cleric, my Divine Strike will go up to 2d8. So you could potentially be looking at, 3d8. So that would be 3 plus the 2 would be 5d8 thunder damage on a regular hit, so 40. Or you could double that 5d8 to 10d8 and deal 80 points of thunder damage on a single strike. And part of the reason that I really like this build is I often feel, and I'm sure some of you feel this way as well, when I'm striking with a weapon, I feel like I have more control because it comes down to my die roll, right? If I have to cast a spell and the DM makes a saving throw, especially with a cantrip, I just feel like it's a waste because if I'm going to cast Firebolt and I'm going to roll to attack, if I miss, I feel like that misses on me because I rolled poorly. But if the DM has to roll a saving throw for it, one, I don't know if the DM's fudging dice or not, so I don't know if they beat it. But if they beat the saving throw, then like the control of whether things hit or miss is out of my hands. So that's why I like attacking things, and that's in this particular instance, you're doing the attack. On top of all that, thunder damage is very rarely resisted. There are usually only a very few creatures that have either resistance or immunity to thunder damage, and you can usually kind of figure out what they are, right? Like I think a cloud giant might have it. Ones that are kind of lightning-y based are usually resistant to both or immune to both, but that's not even always the case. Right? You think about a shambling mound, it's resistant to fire and cold damage, and it heals from lightning damage, but it still takes full damage from thunder. A couple other things about this character. He does have great weapon fighting, great weapon master, rather, as a feat. So because a maul is a heavy weapon, you could choose to reduce your attack by 5 and increase the damage by 10. If we get to that higher level scenario where we were talking about where we're doing 80 points of thunder damage, you could be dealing 80 points, plus that 10 makes it 90, plus the 6 makes it 96, plus 4d6 damage that you would roll, and that would be where you'd put yourself at damage-wise. And there's even ways to increase that further with things like holy weapon. If you are a cleric, since we are a cleric at that point, we are still at this point don't have any spells cast. We are just using a cantrip and dealing clearly over a minimum 100 points of damage at this point. But if you stack holy weapon on top of there, I think it goes up to 5d8 radiant damage on top of that, which could then double to 10d8 on top of that. But my go-to move as this cleric to output a ton of damage was to do cast Spiritual Weapon as a bonus action, usually in the starting turn. And then that would get my Spiritual Weapon out there so I could be dealing a bonus action attack every turn, dealing a d8, plus my spellcasting ability modifier, which as you can see is 5. And actually, I didn't put it on here, but we can, I guess, as we're going through this build. This character actually did get one of those tomes, the tome that increases, I think it's of understanding? Increases your wisdom. Yeah, so he did actually have this as well. So his wisdom was actually a 22. So that would deal even more damage and make his saving throws even harder to handle. So my go-to move was get Spiritual Weapon up so that I could attack with my maul, doing all that crazy damage with Booming Blade cantrip. And then bonus action attack. And then the next turn, I would activate Spirit Guardians, which is a concentration spell. So I'd have Spirit Guardians swirling around me, dealing 3d8 radiant damage and making everybody have to harder to get to me, harder to get away from me. So I'd have Spirit Guardians damage would go off on their turn, and then on my turn I'd swing with my maul with Booming Blade as an action, and then bonus action strike with Spiritual Weapon. Obviously, if we leveled up higher and had Holy Weapon up, we wouldn't have Spirit Guardians, but either way. Plus, don't forget, we have Action Surge. As a second level fighter having Action Surge, we could then strike Booming Blade and then Booming Blade again if we wanted to, 2 turns in a row because it is a cantrip, and then, depending on what you cast spell-wise, so you could potentially do crazy output. And I guess I should talk about what I took spell-wise, too. Maybe we'll level ourselves up to get to higher levels just to see what we could do damage output-wise. But as you can see here are my cantrips, nothing too crazy. Again, we didn't have access to all the cantrips we have now. But the spells I took for being an Eldritch Knight fighter were Absorb Elements, because that'll give me resistance to damage, elemental damage types, and doesn't involve my intelligence modifier. I took Find Familiar, because I could use my Familiar, which my Familiar, as many people have, is an owl, so it could fly in, give me advantage on attack, giving me an opportunity to proc that crit to then do crazy damage with Booming Blade more often. I took Magic Missile, because it was just something I could do as a consistent point of dealing damage, and Magic Missile doesn't use your intelligence modifier at all. And then Shield as a backup. So my AC as it stands right now, I guess I can talk about magic weapons too, or magic items. This character had +1 Mithril Splint Mail, so he didn't have disadvantage on his saving throws, and with the defensive fighting style, he had a 19 AC. He also had a Cloak of Displacement, which made all of attacks against him at disadvantage. So he was pretty good when it came to melee with Spirit Guardians and everything else up. He had Goggles of Night, so he could see in the dark. And with a 19 AC, using Shield, I could bump myself up to a 24 AC if I needed to, or use Absorb Elements to drop damage down, so that kept me pretty much in the fight all the time. Cleric spells were pretty standard, right? Bless, Detect Magic, Guiding Bolt, Healing Word. I had Cure Wounds in here too, as well. He did have Cure Wounds, so he had both Cure Wounds and Healing Word. Second level spells, I had, what did I have? Hold Person, Lesser Restoration, Silent Spiritual Weapon. Obviously, I would have Shatter, and that was a big use of mine as I was a Tempest Cleric. Third level, we had Dispel Magic, Mass Healing Word, and Revivify, and Spirit Guardians. And then at fourth level, I think I just had Death Ward, and I think that was it. But the point, too, at this, because of the way spell slots add together, at this point, at level 12, I did have access to 5th level spell slots, but I couldn't cast any 5th level spells, but I could use my 1 5th level spell slot to upcast other spells if I needed to. So, as I stated, we could roll into combat. We had Resilient, because we started as a fighter, we had proficiency in Constitution, so it made our concentration checks easy to keep up. We took as our variant human feat at first level, Resilient Wisdom. So we had proficiency now in Strength, Constitution, and Wisdom saving throws. I think that was, and I told you I would Great Weapon Master as well. So again, here's our ability scores. Here's we see the skills here. We also had the Weapon Bond feature of Eldritch Knight too, right? So his maul was very important to him, was a big part of his backstory and everything. So he bonded with the weapon, so if he ever lost it, he could summon it back to his hand, or that wouldn't be an issue for him. We did have the little bit of healing in the D10 plus 4 bonus action healing, self-healing in Second Wind. Again, action surge to just do consistent damage output. And then again, we did have other clerical things, right? Like destroy undead and turn undead for our channel divinity if we needed. If somebody hit us, we could always, if we weren't using shield or absorb elements, we could use Wrath of the Storm to make them make a saving throw or take 2d8 lightning or thunder damage. We could also, in theory, if we hit them with Booming Blade, they're sheathed in booming energy, and if they hit us, we could choose to deal 2d8 lightning damage, and then because we dealt lightning damage to them, Thunderbolt Strike, if they're large or smaller, pushes them 10 feet away. So we choose to deal lightning damage when they hit us. They get knocked back 10 feet. Then if they want to come in to hit us again, they need to voluntarily move, then activating the damage from Booming Blade. So there was a lot of multiple layers of this. Plus, again, you are still a base cleric. You do still have decent amount of damage that you can deal based on just your spells and also healing. Action Surge gives you great utility. Again, I had some pretty solid magic items that helped a lot. Right, the boosted wisdom is a big bonus. Cloak of Displacement means I can roll into combat with pretty much all this other stuff, and people try to hit me, but it's going to be hard to do so. And then I have all those backup redundancies like Absorb Elements and Shield. So why don't we go here real quick, and we'll just bump up our cleric levels up to, I don't know, 14. That's a good level. And we'll go over here and take a look and just real quick look at that. So obviously our hit points have increased a bunch. We would have more ability score improvements. Because this character was a cleric of Timora, I would have picked Lucky as one of my ability score improvements, and I probably would have taken Tough as the other one, just to keep us in the fight even more. But as we can see here, our Divine Strike is now going to deal 2d8. We also now have access to Divine Intervention, which could do all sorts of wonky things. But if we go over here and look at our spells, and scroll down, we're going to have access to 5th, 6th, and 7th level spells. So why don't we go here and take a look. Where is it? Well, we have Destructive Wave, which is pretty solid. But where is Holy Weapon? Here it is. So Holy Weapon is a concentration up to an hour. It is a bonus action to cast, too, which is something to consider. And then... let's see. Until the spell ends, the weapon emits bright light and okay, so it's an additional 2d8 radiant damage, my mistake. And then you could choose to shoot it off if you wanted and potentially blind people. So it would deal an extra 2d8 radiant damage, not as much as I thought, but in that crit scenario, we'd be dealing 80 points of thunder damage, 16 points of static damage from the weapon, another 48 radiant damage, and then 46 damage from the Maul, which could put you in you're clearly over 100 points of damage, which is pretty solid in most things, even at higher levels. 100 points of damage in a turn, 100 points of damage in an attack is going to deal significant. If you look at an ancient dragon, a couple of rounds like that, and you're going to decimate them. And that's just you, not including the other members in the party and potentially other things you could keep up in the meantime as well, right? You'd have things at this point like you could be bringing people back from the dead. You'd have mass cure wounds, heal harm. You could conjure a celestial creature to help out. You have access to a lot of very powerful abilities at this point. And let's just take a quick look. We'll look at an ancient ancient red dragon rather. Ancient red dragon has 546 hit points. Okay, so at this point we were only level 18, but with all the stuff we had, we could easily take that fifth of that hit points away with one singular attack on a crit. Yes, I know crits are hard to come by, and that's not necessarily something you can count on, but having that familiar in there to come in and provide you advantage on that attack, depending on whatever else your party could do, you can seriously bump that damage up. And don't even get me started if you happen to also be a 2-cleric party and have a grave cleric in the party who gives them vulnerability, and then that doubles all the damage you've already done. Now we're in the 200 plus range points of damage, and that's just bananas. So that's just a real quick shot at me trying to do a build video, guys. I don't really know what you were looking for from me when you were asking this, but it's a cool character that I built, that I actually got to test out stuff in-game, and it was really fun. So that's that. Please leave me all your honest opinions in the comments down below. I really don't know what you guys are looking for this. So that was my idea of one kind of cleric fighter build. I obviously can look into doing other things if people are interested. Folks had also asked about potentially doing some other builds about like going through like a class guide, right? Like how to play a bard, how to play a barbarian. People have also asked me to do ranking videos where I rank the worst subclass to the best subclass. Obviously, that'll probably cause a whole bunch of issues as people yell at me for what they think is right, but, that's the nature of the internet. So please let me know. I want to try to do more. There's more and more of you joining the channel every day, and that's awesome. But everybody has different things that they want, and obviously they come here for one reason or another. But I want to provide, as much quality content as I can, hitting on the things that you guys want to hear me talk about. So let me know, please, as much as you can. And then obviously I will say a big shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. A big thank you to them. That's also a good way to try to make sure that your suggestions and things you're looking for kind of bubble up to the top. That's options for higher tiers. They can suggest video topics right out the gate, and I just go and make those. So something to consider if you're interested in trying to have a little more control over what comes out on the channel. And then if you haven't subscribed, please be sure to do so and ring that notification bell so you can stay up to date. For the most part, I try to upload these videos around the same time every day, but when new news or Unearthed Arcana or something else comes out, that kind of disrupts that normal flow of video upload, and then those videos kind of come out as fast as I can get them out. So staying up to date with the notification bell is your best bet for that. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.